And thank you for joining us. Oh, thank you. Thank you for joining us for Intopia's Global Accessibility Awareness Day event. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm hosting this event from the lands of the Camaragal people. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we're meeting today. And I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge that we have captioning for this event provided by AI Media. My name is Russ Weekly and I'm going to be hosting this event. Before we kick off though, did you know that this is the 11th year that Global Accessibility Awareness Day has been celebrated, which is kind of amazing, isn't it? So what is this day? Well, this day is about encouraging people all over the world to think, talk and learn about digital accessibility and inclusion for people with disabilities. There are more than 100 events being held around the world today. And for Intopia, we're celebrating Global Accessibility Awareness Day with this Ask Me Anything session, and you'll meet our 4 panelists in a second. But we've also got some new resources to help people, and you can find out about them on our website, which is intopia.digital. And at the end of the session, I'll talk specifically about a very exciting new feature we've added. So let's talk about today's session. This is a chance for you to ask any question you want about digital accessibility with 4 of our amazing experts. You can submit your questions in the Q&A feature down the bottom there, and I'll be monitoring that throughout the session and trying to answer your or feed questions to the team as we go. So you can kick off straight away if you want. But what I might do now is introduce our 4 panelists one at a time. We have Adam, Charlie, Neil, and Lauren. And we might kick off, first of all, with you, Adam. Would you like to say a bit of words about yourself?
I can find the mute button, absolutely. All right, so my name's Adem Cifcioglu. I am one of the co-founders of Intopia, but also digital accessibility consultant for almost 13 years now. Also a person with a disability, so I've got a mild form of cerebral palsy, which means day to day outside the house, you'll probably see me around in a wheelchair if you see me around. That's probably me.
How about you, Charlie?
Hi, I'm Charlii Parker. I'm a senior digital accessibility consultant here at Intopia, and my main job here is to coordinate Intopia Connect, which is the user research arm, I guess you would call it, of Intopia, where we assist with user testing with people with disabilities. So we link businesses with people with disabilities to get their true and honest feedback about products to help with improvement. I am neurodivergent for a number of reasons, which I'll get into later.
Cool. And how about you, Lauren? Quick introduction.
Thanks, Russ. I'm Lauren Hayes and I'm a junior digital accessibility consultant here at Intopia. I've been here since January, and prior to that was freelancing as an accessibility tester, particularly in the kind of more usability space, I guess. And yeah, I think that's it. I'm totally blind and I'm a screen reader user. So thanks.
Cool. Now we have another panelist, Neil, but in true technology fashion, he's disappeared into the ether. We're trying to resurrect him and put him back together pixel by pixel. Hopefully he'll be joining us in the panel in a few seconds. But it looks like we've already got I had a few warm-up questions, but it looks like there's already one here. What are the 3 top, I've already read that. I should point out, by the way, I've got dyslexia, so my reading of these is going to be appalling. What are the top 3 initiatives large businesses can put in place immediately to make their business more digitally accessible? Well, I'm going to throw to each of you, but I know because Adam literally answered this morning on a phone call with a client of ours, so he could answer this in his sleep. So I might start with Adam, and then we'll throw to Lauren and Charlie.
Sure. So I think for me, for businesses and organizations, it's got to start from the top, right? So you get some leadership support for accessibility, you get some leadership understanding of accessibility, and it makes it a lot easier to push things throughout the rest of the business. That's probably number 1. Are we throwing to other panelists for the other 2, Russ, or do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, keep going, and then we'll come back to the others and circle back.
So I think then, so if number 1 is leadership support, number 2 is then embedding into organizational policy and process. And number 3 is making sure that, particularly for projects, sort of project life cycle and agile development, that sort of stuff, making it part of the definition of done, because if it's not part of your definition of done, it's probably not going to get done.
Yeah, cool. Now, Charlie, you've been on both sides of the fence, haven't you? You've been someone that's had to get companies to come and audit, as well as being, so you've sort of had a unique perspective on this. What would be your top 3 things?
Test with real users, test with real users, and test with real users. I am an outlier on the digital accessibility consultancy. WCAG is very important. Building your product to meet standards is very important. But until you test with real users and get the actual feedback, anyone from a UX design perspective, the first thing they want to do, or one of the first things, or one of the most important things, is that something should be easy to use. It should be something that people want to use, and that they'll come back and use it. However, when we talk about accessibility, they say it needs to pass WCAG. And that has nothing to do with the experience of the person that has to use it. Something can be made completely accessible as far as WCAG, and somebody who has a disability, depending on what the issue is within the product itself, might still not be able to get around it, might not find it intuitive. So, and if you want people with disability to use it, get them to test it and get their feedback on it.
Yeah, love that answer. What about you, Lauren? I mean, you've been in the space a while. What sort of things have you seen that companies could do to improve accessibility?
Well, Charlie stole what I was going to say, but that's okay.
All 3 points.
So definitely real testing with real users, absolutely. But also thinking about as you're putting in new processes, if you're upgrading things within your business, thinking about accessibility right from the get-go. I've been in this space for a while, but I've also been on the other side where I've been applying for jobs or starting in new workplaces when I've inquired about whether the software they're using is accessible to use, and they haven't actually known whether it is or not, and more often than not, it hasn't been. So even though I would be capable of being in the role that I've applied for, I've been less likely to be able to do that just because of the inaccessibility of what the companies are using. So it's really thinking about it at all stages of business development, I think.
Cool. That's a great answer, both all of you. So what's your least favourite misconceptions about your disability? That's that was one of the ones we were going to actually ask if we had a canned question. So great question there. Maybe let's go around the other way. Charlie first, and then we'll go back around. Again, maybe just talk people about your particular disabilities, and then go from there.
Yeah. So for me, I have ADHD and I have autism. For me, having ADHD is that everyone thinks that you just scatterbrained and squirrel and off you go. It's not so much physical hyperactivity that is the problem. I can sit in one spot for hours without moving, and almost without having a thought pass through my head if my brain, Brian, doesn't feel like interacting. But so people think that I'm always bouncing off the walls. I'm not. I sit quietly a lot of the time. So there's a lot of that. And also with autism for myself, that was a comorbid diagnosis with my ADHD, and it was one that I wasn't comfortable with for a very long time because I got a lot of the you're not really autistic, or I wasn't autistic enough. So it's just easier not to talk about that because I'm clearly not nonverbal. I don't have certain other things that show. But if you get to know me, it comes through. it shines through. So that's one for me that I needed to really learn to accept and own for myself because there was a lot of the you're not, or I used to get you're not really ADHD, and then I wasn't really autistic enough. So living up to the label is probably the hardest thing.
Yeah. Lauren, what about some of the misconceptions about your disability?
Yeah, I think some of the common questions that I get asked just when I'm out and about is, well, how do you use technology if you can't see it, because I think people make an assumption that you have to look at a screen, and so then you go into explanation about what a screen reader is, or Braille, and how we have electronic Braille displays as well. You know, there's lots of different methods that we use to access technology and the digital space. Then another common question is, why don't you have a guide dog, or where's your guide dog? And I think, you know, I am a cane user. I love guide dogs, but it's not for me personally. So there's this kind of assumption that if you have a guide dog, that you're going to be better off than if you're using a cane. So it's this kind of stereotype, I think. They're probably the main two that spring to mind, but I know, you know, there are many more, from talking to you a bit more loudly, or I've had people try to pick me up and carry me onto public transport. So there's an assumption that, you know, I need lots of extra help, and the help is always kind of given without me being asked first.
Yeah. Well, that leads on to Adam. I know you've got a story you can tell about this. The assumptions people have made about you. I mean, yours is in the physical space, obviously, but
Yeah, I mean, I've got a couple, but I think the one for me is, and this is going to sound strange, but I think one of the common misconceptions is people think I'm disabled. And I say that it's going to sound strange because I've got a disability, right? It's part of me, it's a characteristic, but I'm not disabled. And I know that's kind of language and playing with words, but to me, I can do everything I want to do. It's just some things I need to do a bit differently, right? So, you know, and yeah, I'm never going to climb a tree, but who wants to do that anyway? So I think for me, it's the fact that people just assume you can't do things, whereas anything I want to do, I can do. I just do it a bit differently. And yeah, to Lauren's point about people just coming up and sort of trying to carry her onto public transport, similar experiences with me when, you know, I'm heading to a train station, for example, or I'm just sort of going down the street. Someone will occasionally randomly come up and just give me a push because, you know, they want to do their good deed for the day. And look, let's be honest, sometimes I'm appreciative, particularly if I'm going uphill. But I think, you know, most of the time, ask first. Don't just randomly come up behind someone and try to do something, because depending on, you know, what that person is actually trying to do, you may be helping them, but you may not be. And 9 times out of 10, you're probably not.
yeah, I remember you telling us a story about where someone just grabbed you and pushed you up a hill without being asked. They went past where you wanted to go, which is kind of insane.
Absolutely.
Madness. Before we go to the next question, we actually put Neil together pixel by pixel, and he almost looks human. So that's a major achievement.
The first.
Neil, do you want to do yes first? Do you want to do a quick introduction before we jump back into some questions?
Hi, I'm Neil, and apologies for being very, very late. I had major technical issues. But yeah, I am one of the digital accessibility consultants at Intopia. I've been here for just over a year now. And prior to that, I've been involved in digital accessibility and e-accessibility for far too long. And yeah, I'm a totally blind person. I use a screen reader, I use Braille, I use the internet, and I don't ever wake up in the morning without thinking how wonderful online technology is. So yeah, I'm a big fan, but also somebody who is the first to point out if something isn't quite right.
Well, let's jump into our next question, which is a really good one from Serena, which is there any all-encompassing guide for digital accessibility? And I see this frustration because I feel the same. I seem to find a lot of different guides for different disabilities, just deaf, just blind, etc., but nothing that considers everyone in the same forum. Fantastic question. So who'd like to kick? I'll leave this open to you. Well, maybe let's put Neil on the spot. Since he's so late, let's just give him the punishment and you can answer first. If you want to.
Well, there's there's never a one size fits all, of course, but
Yeah.
I think it is fair to say that there have been some, and there are some great attempts to bring about standards in respect to digital accessibility. So many of us work in the area of things like the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or in Australia and in Europe, we know of the wonderfully named standard AS 301-549, which does
Rolls off
sound,
the tongue, doesn't it?
well, it sounds like a character out of Star Wars, doesn't it? And you know, so it's probably R2D2's younger brother or something.
Elon Musk's new child.
That's very likely. So those standards and those guidelines go a long way to codifying as best as can be done, I think. A place that people can go to get a snapshot, if you like, and a detailed snapshot of that, of what's available for and what should be considered for a variety of disabilities, impairments, and other accessibility issues. But it's by no means catch-all.
Yeah, cool. Anyone else like to jump in here with a single answer that might help?
I've got an answer. I don't know if it's going to help, but so I think similar to what Neil said, other than the technical standards. So we talked about ASEN 301-549 or EN 301-549 or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which are just that. They're technical standards to help people make things technically accessible. But as Charlie was mentioning earlier, that's only half the battle, right? Because you can be completely technically accessible, but completely unusable and inaccessible. So just to reiterate a point, that accessibility is not, it's not a one size fits all, and it's not a set and forget. So unfortunately, I don't think there's a resource that we can point to that says, you know, this covers everything, because some, you know, depending on the type of content you're looking at, whether it's a website, whether it's an app, whether it's, you know, standard HTML or CSS, whether it's React, whether it's Angular, whether it's iOS or Android, there's going to be different things to do, different techniques and different methods.
Cool.
Clear as mud, surely.
No. Anyone else like to add, or we can move on to the next question?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in. It is an issue, and the problem with these guides being single siloed to particular disabilities is that people are sometimes gifted with more than one. So we can fix something for something that works with a screen reader, or we could fix something that fixes color contrast. But if someone's a screen reader user and is still unable to use a mouse, unable to use their keyboard, they need to use touchscreens, they need to use other inputs. Things don't always work, especially with touchscreen iPads and things like that. So I know someone who's a screen reader user. They use an iPad predominantly. Not everything works well with both. So they can use a screen reader, but other touch targets and things like that don't work for them. So you need to consider everything, and that things won't always work the way, or they'll work well for one disability, but people with more than one disability aren't going to get covered.
Yeah, cool. Lauren, do you want to add anything, or we can move on? It's up to you.
No, I think we've covered everything pretty well, so happy to
Cool.
move on.
No. Well, the next question, it actually relates. In fact, there's another question below I can answer quickly, which says, will the recording of potential text be available? Yes. As soon as the session finished, we'll be gradually uploading to YouTube. So yes, Serena, that'll be available. Next one down from Anonymous, which sounds ominous. What is the best way to broach the subject of accessibility, which those that are completely clueless to the idea? Oh, great question. Who'd like to take the ball first?
So have you thought about accessibility?
Cool. That's a good start.
Good start.
Adam, you're dealing in this space a lot.
I think the important thing is just to have the conversation, and to be mindful and understanding that the first conversation or the first couple of conversations may not actually lead anywhere, because people don't know what they don't know. And it can be quite daunting when you're first starting, and that's okay, I think. So if you start by having the conversations about, you know, what it actually means to people, and particularly from a usability lens, right? So when you're first talking to someone about accessibility, don't start by talking about the legals, the regulations, the WCAG, and all the standards you need to meet, because that's going to sound, to be honest, it's going to sound legal and boring. Who likes talking about that stuff? Whereas if you can talk about the impact on the user and the fact that, you know, making things accessible actually more generally makes things usable and more usable for anybody, that's probably where I'd start.
Cool.
And I would
cool. Yeah,
I would add
sorry.
to that, be accessible with that person. So just as Adam says, don't start off by using the scary stuff like legal and you might get sued if and all of that. Just simply have a conversation about, have you thought how someone would use your website or your product if they couldn't, and then fill in the gaps depending what you want to talk about. And most people at that point will not have thought of that, but actually once they do start, they're really quite keen to investigate further. So, you know, take all the jargon out, take all the buzzwords out, because they're just no good to anybody. So be accessible to them just like we're asking them to be accessible for us.
Yeah, it's a great question. A great answer. Is it everyone answered that? I think we have, haven't we?
Can I just add something as well?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry,
No,
Laura.
that's okay. Just also that people, might want to know what accessibility is, and WCAG, as you said, can be scary or maybe a little bit geeky, and so they think that it's all too difficult. And some people may not even know what assistive technology is, let alone accessibility. So you might have to pare it back even more and perhaps just show them about how, if you have a disability, how you might use your phone, if you're using a screen reader or a switch or any other kind of AT. And if you're not a user, there's plenty of online resources about how AT works and good kind of demos on YouTube and things. So getting people to really understand that there's lots of different ways that people are going to come to their app or to their website. And it might just be people within organizations wanting to know about how to make Microsoft Word documents accessible. We're not even getting into the web space yet, and people are really surprised to learn that that's actually quite straightforward. So yeah, I think keeping it really simple in the beginning is a good way to start, and then you can just build it up from there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. As you're all talking, something hit me that one of the best ways I've seen is when you tell stories. Like, stories are the most resonating thing. And when I've talked to people in the past that are really beginning, I've just told them stories with either real people in the room or telling them a story of someone with a disability and the barriers they face. And that's a real connection, rather than talk about legality or WCAG or something. Just talk about stories of what, you know, people, the benefits and limitations put on with a good experience or a bad experience. But
yeah, and I've just noticed,
okay.
Russ, that Andrew has put something in the chat around making it relatable and practical to the person you're talking to, which I think is a great way to go, because everyone's experienced some form of situational disability at some form or another, at some point or another. So so that's a way to do it as well.
We have another question. I'm looking at the one. Oh, sorry, Charlie.
Sorry, I'm just jumping over the top again, but it's true. We build software and programs and systems for people to use. So finding out the people's story is the best way to get the best product and the best experience.
Yeah, cool. Okay, the next one is, with the road into an accessibility career being so non-linear, which, by the way, you'll hear in a second, all of us are coming via strange routes, so it's completely true. What recommendations would you have for those in the early stage of their career? How and where would you learn the skills required? Really good question. So I'd almost ask it in two things: skills required, and then how do you take those skills and break into the industry? So who would like to start? I think I feel like I'm throwing you under the bus here, Neil, but there is some glee in that as well. So I'm going to throw you under the bus again. You've been too quiet for too long.
You're so kind. I think there's not a single way, as at the risk of this being the answer to all the questions, but there isn't a single way and a single route. And I think all four of us in the spotlight here will probably have got to our places right now in very different ways. What I would say is, to start with, you have to have an interest. I mean, that sounds obvious, but I'm afraid it isn't always that obvious. So I think that's important. You have to have, I think it's important to have some empathy as well as to why people sometimes do struggle to access digital content and digital products. So that's important. Having the skills around understanding the technology that's used, well, that's not a prerequisite, because you will learn that as you come in and work with people more and more. But obviously the more that you can learn about assistive technology, the better. But don't be scared if you haven't learned about that. You will learn about it as you go on. And just talk to people. So talk to people in the industry already who are working in the space, see what they're working on, see what makes them do what they do, and talk to real end users if you possibly can. Nowadays, 30 years ago, it was very difficult to talk to people who you didn't know, unless you met them at work or you met them, I don't know, down the pub or whatever it happened to be. But nowadays, there are online forums everywhere, and finding out from those what people's interests are, what people's issues are, actually is a great start. But invariably, I often hear people say, I got into this because I knew someone who, and then the story starts from there.
Cool. I love the idea of starting with empathy too, because I think that's so important. Who'd like to go next? Keep in mind, we've got a lot of other questions, so maybe just one of you jump in. Oh, fantastic.
So I think from the perspective of someone with lived experience getting into accessibility, I have a music background, so I'd studied music therapy, and I never thought that I would have been involved in accessibility at some point. I just thought it was this really geeky thing, and it was like all too hard. And then I just fell into it. So I was working for a different accessibility company in a kind of admin role, but did some accessibility testing as well. And I learned about creating accessible Word documents. Like I knew a little bit before because of being a user of assistive tech and knowing what I found accessible, but not really knowing as much about how to kind of put that into practice. And then realizing, so the things that make an accessible Word document are often the things that make an accessible web page. So good headings and links that have good descriptive labels and descriptive alt text. How you make them on a Word document compared to a website, of course, is very different. And the website, you need to have more coding knowledge, and that has come for me more recently. But I was really just paring it back to basics initially, and just gradually learning as I went and talking to people, as Neil said. So learning about their skills and doing my own research and networking. So it was kind of something that happened in a really gradual way over like maybe a period of a few years. It wasn't like I just woke up one day and I knew all this stuff about accessibility. So yeah, again, it's starting small and then building on what you know. And I feel like I'm never, ever going to stop learning about accessibility. It's a journey that's just going to continue, which is really exciting, but also kind of crazy because it's like there's still so much I don't know.
Sounds great. Just one quick question for the other two remaining. Is there like a course that either you know of that is a good starting point? Maybe that'll help, because the answers are great, but very vague.
I'm going to jump in here and say, is there a course? There probably are courses out there now. I'm not going to recommend any of them because I haven't done them myself. So not having done them, I don't recommend anything I haven't sort of been through myself. But to pretty much +1 everything that Lauren just said in terms of the way I actually got into the industry, I'm kind of living proof as to how it works, because I started my career as a back-end web developer, right? PHP, MySQL, nothing to do with accessibility. Realized I wasn't any good at that. Moved into the front end, JavaScript, HTML. Realized I wasn't very good at that either. I was better than the back end, but not great. And someone said, "Oh, what about this accessibility thing?" And the more I kind of looked at it, the more I went, "Well, it's got the bits of HTML back in sort of when I was starting that I kind of like, which is, you know, proper markup and semantics and all that sort of stuff, and kind of the rest is history, in that you start pulling a thread and you start reading things. And then I met people and I went to meetups and presentations and that sort of stuff, and all of a sudden, you know, a few years later, I'm in the industry and I'm now running my own company. So like Lauren said, start small, because that's kind of step one.
We have to hear from Charlie now that we've heard from the others. How did you start?
I chased the dopamine, which is how I do most things having ADHD. I got here in quite a roundabout way. I started as a customer service officer at Centrelink, so frontline customer service doing Centrelink forms. And from there, I got funneled into functional testing. From the functional testing within Centrelink, I then moved into usability testing and accessibility testing. They kind of had a lab there that I worked in. And that was when I got hooked, thinking, wow, you can actually make things better for people. I'm the least IT person you'll ever meet. I live a very analog life. I avoid technology as much as possible. It doesn't like me, I don't like it, and we stay away, and yet here I am. So for me, finding out that technology can be used to make things easier for people who otherwise wouldn't be able to do something is amazing. So that's sort of where I fell into it, and kept chasing the dopamine. You find something good and move on to something that, you know, excites you even more. And the fact that, because I don't think anyone wakes up, or never used to wake up and say, I'm going to be a digital accessibility consultant. It just wasn't on the job list. But now it's starting to become something that people can look at and say, I'd like to do that, where we're all doing it, but there wasn't really a pathway. So get in any way you can, learn everything that you can that excites you, because there's enough that you could fall down one rabbit hole and become almost a specialist in one area that you enjoy, and focus on that, or you know, get good across the board and do the part of it that you want to do, because it's such a big field.
Sounds great. Right, this next one, we could spend like 6 hours on this, so I'm going to allow you all one short answer, because it's so painful for all of you. What is your accessibility nemesis? For example, a program, a patent, a company. We were laughing about this the other day, that this could be like a 2-hour conversation at least. So one accessibility nemesis from each of you, things that really frustrate you. How about Lauren first?
All right, keeping this short is going to be difficult. I will see how I go.
Just
though.
within reason.
So I think inaccessible forms are my current bugbear. It'll probably change to something else next week, but at the moment it's forms. I recently had to fill in a travel declaration for a government organisation, and there was a really long form to fill in. It had an accessibility button at the beginning that I had to enter. I couldn't fill in the form any other way, but the accessible version of the form wasn't overly accessible. So it had a capture to fill in, which did have an audio alternative, but trying to find it to play it was kind of challenging. And there were a whole lot of edit fields and drop downs which didn't work as I would expect them to. I won't go into the techie details, but had to do all these weird workarounds with my screen reader to access them. And it took me probably a couple of hours to fill it in, when it really probably maybe should have taken 30 minutes. So yeah,
That's a good
good
one.
form design,
Ooh.
very important.
Great. Sorry, I cut you off at the end there. Very
No
rude.
worries.
Who'd like to go next? Neil. Charlie's shaking her head.
How about websites that play loud music at you when you land on them without actually asking them to? So the video or the music track, whatever it's coming from, starts automatically. It doesn't wait for you to hit the play button. For me, what that means is A, I wasn't expecting it and I jump out of my seat. Secondly, my screen reader can no longer be heard under the crashing cymbals and loud guitar music and bass for some performer who I've never heard of and never wish to again. Yeah, that's very frustrating. So don't like that at all.
Cool. I do feel sorry that I'm limiting you all to one, because I know you've probably all got about 10 horrible pet peeves. Well, Adam's nodding. Charlie's still shaking her head slightly. So we will come back to you, Charlie, if you want. But Adam, why don't you give us your biggest nemesis?
So I'm gonna take it a bit differently to Lauren and Neil here, and say the perception that accessibility responsibility lies with one particular area or one particular function.
Mm-hmm.
So the number of times in the context of accessibility I've heard, that's a developer's responsibility, or that's a designer's responsibility, or, you know, it's the responsibility of that group over there. It's not, right? Accessibility needs to be embedded in all aspects of a digital life cycle, from design through to development and testing and everything else in between. So I think taking the sort of different tack there, that'd probably be the biggest thing. I've got another one that I'm going to throw in here quickly, and that is the perception that one line of code overlays will fix everything, because they won't.
Getting political out of the box.
It's not political. They just won't. They don't work.
They don't work.
Totally.
It's
Totally
non-controversial, Russ.
Totally agree. I was expecting. Okay, I was expecting modals and PDFs and marquee displays.
You only gave us one.
Yeah, Charlie. Yeah, did you want to? You were shaking your head earlier. Have you got any pet nemesis?
Oh, well, mine used to be Adam, but now I work for him.
Wow, we are getting very heavy.
Wow.
So we're all good now. But again, mine's similar to Neil, is things that play when you open them. So my whole brain is 50,000 tabs that are open, and that's how I operate my computer as well. I think I've got 6 versions or 6 instances of Chrome with about 20 tabs open currently running on my computer at the moment. And so I'll read down a list from a search, and I'll just open up a whole bunch of web pages, and then one of them will start playing. And that will completely throw me off. Now I've got to go and dig back and find which one of those is playing. And I'm going to go for another as well, was that very similar to what Adam said, is that people thinking that accessibility is one person's responsibility or one area's responsibility, but it's also the end-to-end process. You know, people look at digital accessibility, but then don't think about the accessibility of their brick and mortar stores or their offices and things like that. So somebody can do part of a journey, but they can't fulfill the end journey. So it's looking at it holistically. I think that's not enough of as well.
Yeah, but can I congratulate you all for your constraint? I was hoping that, you know, that could have turned into a bloodbath. So well done. The next question is, well, there's 2 following up that are sort of similar, so we might be able to join them together. What is one accessibility issue that you always encounter on a website that is so simple to fix, it boggles your mind, and why it exists at all? And then the one below it is, we could probably put them together, is what is the most common accessibility issues here? So one is one that boggles your mind the most, and one is the most common. They're sort of related, but how about we throw this open to anyone? What's the one that boggles your mind that's super easy to fix?
I can
Someone has
start.
to answer.
No one else jumping in. Labeling of elements, buttons or links or things like that. I mean, you know, it's really easy. You know what you want the button to do. So 9 times out of 10, that's probably the label it needs.
Yeah, it's a good one. Lauren, Neil? Something simple that's mind-boggling.
Yeah, just kind of related to that, I guess, which is just use the gift that is given to you. So use semantic elements properly. First of all, use them like headings, for example, because that helps us navigate through a screen far more efficiently. But if you are going to use them properly. So don't randomly throw level heading 2 below heading level 3 for the just because it looks good. So that's probably one. There are plenty of others, but that's one for starters.
Cool. Lauren or Charlie?
Mine are probably the same, the labeling of elements and good use of headings. So often I see text that you assume probably should be a heading and there's no heading structure there at all. They're just such simple things.
Yeah, cool. Charlie?
Unmute. There we go. Sorry, I was having unmuting issues. Again, headings. Proper use of headings and heading structure, and that's not just, it's definitely for people who use screen readers, but also the neurodivergent point of view. It gives a nice visual structure to the page so that it just helps you to read and consume the information. So it helps everyone. And
I'm so glad you brought that up, by the way. I cut you off at the end, sorry. As someone with dyslexia, same thing as well. Nice, simple heading. People always assume it's just for screen readers, but for people that are neurodivergent, it is so, so critical. So big win there. Okay, well, this is sort of similar, so we might be able to skip over, but what is it? And I might throw this to Adam because you've probably looked at more audits than anyone on earth. That might be a slight exaggeration, but what's the most common accessibility that you've seen in the wild in your 37 years as an auditor? Again, that might be a slight exaggeration.
I'm not 37 years of age yet, Russ, so that's going to be difficult. But so most common accessibility issue that I've seen, was that the question? Am I?
Yes.
So I think it's got to do with a couple of things that we've all touched on, plus one other. So I think it's incorrect or improper use of headings, in that they're either things that look like headings, so they're styled as headings visually, but they're not actually marked up as headings, and the labeling of things, but then also color contrast.
Cool.
There's almost always a color contrast issue.
Oh, that's pretty cool. For some reason, I thought you were going to say alt attributes. I don't know why, because it just seems to be the most common one that I've seen. But
that's probably also true. There's a few. This is where most common is kind of subjective, right?
Yeah. The irony is that the alt attribute has been around since before you were born, 37 years ago. So there's no excuse. Well, we can cut those two out. That's good. Okay. Have you seen any standards for flagging which aspects of accessibility a website or app has optimized for, e.g., not accessible, not tested for screen readers, either enter at your own peril or keyboard access should be solid? Okay. Am I getting that? I'm not 100% sure about this question, but flagging that it's keyboard accessible, but not screen reader accessible sort of thing. Interesting idea. Thanks for the question, Laura. Who would like to answer that one?
I can sort of start the conversation. I haven't seen any standards, but there are a lot of websites out there that say we are optimized for this, or their accessibility statement often talks about those kinds of things. The one thing I would say is, if you are going to put something out there like that, so not tested for screen readers, maybe put in the line about, that you're working on it and it's something that you're fixing, so that people know that you are on a journey. I think that, and Lauren and Neil can probably talk to this definitely more than I can, but if something doesn't work, but they say to you, we know this doesn't work, but we're trying to fix it, it gives the organisation a lot more credibility than going, look, we don't support this, so sorry, you'll just have to go somewhere else, or it's kind of like, we don't care enough about you to try and fix this for you. So to say, look, we know we're not perfect, and nobody on their accessibility journey is perfect. Please let us know what trouble you have, if you have any trouble, and we're on a journey to fixing it. So as far as I know, no standards, but I would definitely let people know that you are on the journey rather than someone getting there and going, well, this doesn't work and it's horrible and I hate it. You go, this doesn't work, it's horrible, I hate it. Oh, look, they're fixing it, aren't they? Like that's a really nice thing to do. And so you earn back a little bit of credibility.
That's really cool. As you were talking, I was just thinking about a funny thing. Imagine if you went to a building and it said, yes for stairs, no for wheelchairs. Like, in what world would you do that? It seems like
that would be really handy. As someone who uses a wheelchair day to day, I would love because to be honest, if I'm going somewhere, I don't look at whether the building's accessible or not, because if I did that 9 times out of 10, I probably wouldn't leave the house. So I kind of decide when I get there. But if there was, and I'm kind of saying this jokingly, but it would be really handy if there was something on the wall as you drove up to go, hey, yeah, this has got stairs. This is accessible from a stairs perspective, but doesn't work for wheelchairs, for example.
Totally agree. You know what's weird is a while ago we were trying to build an app for to work with State Rail, because people were going to events with fully wheelchair users, and they would get to the platform and they'd get on the platform and they'd go to the train station and want to get off, and the lift was broken. And so they'd have to go to 3 stops back. Like, we were trying to work with State Rail to work out which lifts were in operation so they know before they got there. It's a frustrating world. Anyway, Neil, I cut you off.
No, not only that, there's a lot of activity in the chat at the moment about accessibility statements, which I think is really, really important for people to capture some of that if they can. What we always say to organisations when we're working with them is, look, accessibility statements aren't there for you to say how wonderful you're doing with accessibility. What they're there for is for you to have an honest explanation to your visitors as to how your accessibility is, at least how you think your accessibility is. So it's really important in an accessibility statement to be honest and to say, this is what we know works really well, or we believe works really well. And also, these are areas where we know we need to improve. We're aware of them. Yes, we have a roadmap for it, if they do have one. And these are the people that you can come to in our organisation to ask further advice or get further information, ask more questions, so that it's really clear when someone does have an accessibility issue with your website, they know, A, that you care, B, that you're actually dealing with it, and C, where to come to you if they need to.
So just on that point really quickly, because one of the best accessibility statements I've seen, and for the life of me, I can't remember who it was, so I've just gone blank, but one of the things they had that surprised me because no one else had it was a list of known issues. So, you know, they had the standard, this is kind of what we're trying to do, and this is what we're trying to comply with, and these are the things we're doing. But they also had a dot-pointed list of known issues with, for the more complex stuff, some explanation underneath to say what the issue was. And I don't know, question for Neil and Lauren, I think that'd be handy, wouldn't it?
It's very handy, and absolutely best practice is what we always recommend, because as I say, it deals with that issue of they're aware of it, they're dealing with it, you hope, and they recognize it. If they try to hide it, you either think that they're not aware of it or they are aware of it but they don't care. So knowing that they are, and they've actually gone to the point of identifying the specific problems that they understand exist, is a real statement in its own right about the commitment to accessibility of that organisation.
And so often it's not the case. I've been to websites where they'll have their accessibility statement and it will say something like, this site is WCAG compliant and was tested with screen readers, but that they hadn't tested it with any other assistive tech or user groups, and the date of the statement will be like 2013, or like it'll be a long time ago. So clearly the site's been upgraded since then and might not be as accessible as they've claimed. So you can tell that it's just been really neglected, and I always find that disappointing. So yeah, it is exciting when I get a list of known issues, and when there is a space to provide feedback as well.
Amazing. I think everyone's answered that question. We've got one more question, which is perfect because we've got about 5 or 7 minutes left. And this is a great one too. So how do you champion digital accessibility within your organization if you don't have lived experience or know anyone within your organization with a disability? Great question. Anyone? Maybe start with Charlie. You're working in this space more than anyone, helping all sorts of groups tie together.
Yeah, and for me, when I started, I didn't even know, well, and for me, you know, I don't consider ADHD a disability. It's because it's who I am. It's part of my core being. I just have arrived in a world that was not set up for me, which I guess is every disability. So it's just who I am. It's not something that, you know, I can fix or compensate for using devices and things like that. It's who I am as a person. You know, some people are sporty, some people are grumpy, I'm just a little bit off with the fairies sometimes and do things slightly different, and it makes me twice as fun to be around. And I think I can speak on behalf of everybody on the panel that will agree with that. Just nod and pretend. But so for me, I started because, again, I was chasing dopamine. I thought it was fantastic. So you don't necessarily have to be someone or know someone. Just be careful not to speak on behalf of, and talk to people with disability, whether they're in your organisation or not. So don't become the voice of and champion and believe that you know what's best for everybody. But you can talk to people and learn things and say, I was speaking to someone who had this issue and this difficulty, and bring it in that way. So you don't necessarily have to have a disability. You don't necessarily have to know someone with a disability. It can just be something that you are excited about, but just be aware that you're an ally and a champion for it. You don't necessarily have to speak on behalf of, because people with disability, we're pretty good at talking for ourselves most of the time, if you ask us.
Fantastic. From some of the others, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Can't really improve on that answer, so I'm not gonna try. But I mean, that's it. I think as long as you're not sort of pretending to speak on behalf of a person with a disability, then I think you can, you know, it starts by having the conversation, and having the conversation, as we were talking about earlier, about the potential impact. And if you can relate it back to the general usability principle, that helps as well, right? If we talk, I was talking, I think, about contrast earlier, right? We've all had issues with color contrast at one point or another, you know, like, for example, looking at your mobile device when the sun's out, you're outside, you're trying to read something, and the page got poor contrast, you can't read the content, right? That's an accessibility issue. It's not specifically an accessibility issue that is limited to someone with a particular disability.
Yeah, fantastic. Lauren or Neil, anything you'd like to do to wrap up?
No, I don't have anything to add, I don't think, for this. Neil?
It's all been said.
Cool. Well, on that note, we might wrap up the session. So thank you everyone very much for attending. Our thanks go to our amazing panelists, Adam, Neil, Lauren and Charlie. I got that in the wrong order. AI Media for all the live captions, but especially to everyone that's come along, and also for the amazing conversations in the chat. There's an incredible bunch of resources and information shared. So thank you very much to everyone. Now, just before we all go, two things. One, a recording will be available on the YouTube channel, and we'll try and get some of the content out of the chat as well, because there's some really good info there. But just before we wrap up, we're really excited that we're going to be releasing a brand new resource in Intopia called, get ready for this, the Accessibility Not Checklist. And it's an amazing new resource to help anyone working in the digital accessibility space, no matter what role they work in. And this resource provides detailed information on how to make your work as an accessibility specialist as accessible and inclusive as possible. Now, you can find that on our website, intopia.digital, but you can also go to follow Intopia on Twitter, LinkedIn or Facebook. We'd love to you to go and explore it and have a look at it and give us your feedback. A very exciting resource. So that's it for today from us. Thank you very much for joining the webinar, and we hope you all have a great Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Thank you again, everyone.
Thanks all, and thanks Russ for hosting.
Go ahead.